Somewhere in the heart of one of the largest rainforests on Earth, archaeologists found German beer mugs. Not Roman coins, not Portuguese crucifixes, not Belgian rubber trade ledgers, stamped with the seal of Leopold II. German beer mugs, stoneware, fired in the Westerwald kilns of 18th century Germany. And the question nobody thought to ask, the question that opens up an entire buried world, is this: what were they doing there? The Congo rainforest was, for most of human history, impenetrable. The peoples who lived there lived in isolation, timeless, unchanged, untouched by the currents of commerce that were reshaping the rest of the world. The lesson was, Africa had no trade networks worth mentioning. The rivers carried no commerce, the forest held no merchants. And the first time a manufactured object from the outside world reached the heart of Central Africa, it arrived strapped to a European. That version is clean, it is tidy. It places Africa firmly outside of history until Europe provides an entrance. Here is what actually happened. Before we get to the beer mugs, and we will get there, you need to understand what was already in place. It was a trading civilization. The Congo River and its tributaries, the Ubangi, the Sanga, the Alima, the Kwa, the Ruki, the Mfimi, the Momboyo, form one of the most extensive river systems on the planet. And long before any European laid eyes on them, those rivers were highways. Not metaphorical highways, literal functioning, commercially organized, politically regulated highways. At the mouth of the river and along the Atlantic coast sat the kingdom of Loango, recognized by European voyagers by around 1500. Loango was a sophisticated political structure presided over by the Maloango, a sacred king who ruled from the capital of Bwali. He lit a sacred fire at his coronation that burned continuously until his death. Each year he shot an arrow into the sky in a rain-making ceremony that bound his legitimacy to the fertility of the land. His craftsmen, the Vili, worked in redwood, copper and iron, manufactured salt, and wove palm cloth raffia that circulated as currency across Central Africa. Hundreds of miles to the east, at the critical junction where the navigable upper river met the overland caravan routes, sat Malebo Pool. 4 permanent markets operated here: Entamo, Kinshasa, Mpila, and Mefwa, supporting thousands of permanent residents. The Tio people controlled these markets. Their king, the Oku, held a primarily spiritual role and lived over 100 kilometers away. The Landa, their neighbors, invented something even more remarkable: perpetual kingship, a system in which each new king did not merely succeed the old one, but became him. The Mongo of the deep forest needed none of this. They governed through the concept of Okofo, the right of the first occupier. 3 different approaches to governance, all of them functioning, all of them producing surplus, managing trade, and organizing the movement of goods. The rivers were roads, and the roads were busy. The engine of this world was trade, specifically segmented, relay-style, ecologically specialized trade. European ships docked at ports along the Atlantic coast: Loango, Malemba, Cabinda, Boma. The merchants on board did not venture inland. The climate killed them too fast. Instead, they traded with coastal African brokers, men known as mafuks or mercadores, who handled all transactions. The standard unit of exchange on this coast was called the parcel. 1 parcel corresponded to the value of an adult male slave. The mafuk calculated value from the African monetary perspective. The European merchant calculated from his own ledger. They bargained until the parcel satisfied both. From the coast, goods moved overland. The Lower Zaire River is blocked near its mouth by the Yelada Rapids, impassable. The primary organizers of this overland network were the Vili merchants of Loango, who built and maintained caravan routes hundreds of miles into the interior. Their caravans employed professional guides with expert geographic knowledge, armed guards and porters carrying loads of up to 90 kilograms. And this is where the Bobangi enter the story. Starting around the 1750s, the Bobangi, originally a society of mobile fishermen from the Sanga River basin, made a decision. They built massive, heavily armed wooden canoes capable of carrying up to 60 paddlers. The Mokonzi was not a hereditary chief. He was a merchant who had accumulated enough wealth, enough dependence, enough political alliances to claim authority. They carried European goods, including, as the archaeological record would later confirm, stoneware mugs from Germany. Let us trace the journey of a Westerwald beer mug. Westerwald is a region in what is now Western Germany. Its workshops produced grey salt-glazed stoneware for centuries. At the Atlantic coast, the mug entered the parcel system. It was bundled with other European goods and traded to a mafuk broker. From there, it passed to a Vili caravan leader, who loaded it among hundreds of other items for the long overland march to Malebo Pool. Months passed, possibly a season. The caravan stopped to cultivate crops during the rains. At Malebo Pool, it entered the market. The Tio brokers received it, assessed its value in local terms. The mug went into a canoe. For weeks or months, it moved up the Congo River, through channels where the forest closed in overhead. The total elapsed time from the Westerwald kiln to the interior of the Congo Basin, an average of 5 years, and finally came to rest somewhere between the Ruki and the Momboyo rivers and the shores of Lake Mai-Nombe. In the Landa Kingdom, imported European crockery was an emblem of aristocratic power, something the elite possessed and commoners did not. The Tio had already largely abandoned making their own pottery because the segmented river trade network made it cheaper to import ceramics than to produce them locally. First, the Maloango, the secret king of Loango, the Atlantic gateway through which European goods first entered Central African trade networks. By the end of the 18th century, wealthy plebeian traders in Loango possessed up to 700 dependents, operated their own armed retinues, and waged their own wars. The royal line became extinct in 1750. After 1787, no new king was appointed for nearly 2 centuries. A sacred fire that had burned since the kingdom's founding went out. Not because of European conquest, because of the market. No individual name survives in the sources for a specific Bobangi merchant chief, and that itself is part of the suppression. The Ngai Lino, the Tio title for the tribute-collecting notable who ran the markets at Kinshasa and Entamo, managed what was effectively a transit economy of enormous scale. His name is also lost. The silence is the evidence. Before approximately 1750, the Congo River trade was organized as a mosaic of local monopolies. Around the 1750s, the Bobangi changed this. They didn't seize territory. They didn't fight a war for control of the river. They became indispensable middlemen, not by eliminating the competition, but by being more efficient than any alternative. And when European explorers finally reached Malebo Pool in the 1870s and 1880s, Stanley among them, they found a river already organized for long-distance trade. They found an economy. They chose to describe it as wilderness. The suppression has a specific mechanism. The language of the blank slate. African middlemen were dismissed as petty traders. Caravan routes were described as paths. The parcel accounting system was reduced to barter. The Westerwald mugs exist in the archaeological record. They are real. The network that carried them is also real, also documented, also verifiable. Ask a person with a history degree what the Congo looked like commercially in 1750, and they will describe a forest. The primary written documentation of 18th century Central African trade comes overwhelmingly from European sources: ship manifests, missionary journals, colonial reports. The evidence for African commercial agency was available. The UNESCO General History of Africa began publication in 1964. Jan van Siena's work on Central African history was available from the 1960s. The mainstream version did not persist because the evidence was unavailable. It persisted because the institutions that produced historical knowledge had structural incentives to maintain the blank slate narrative. That is not ignorance, that is choice. 1. Africans were tricked into trading for worthless trinkets. What actually happened was a century-long structural extraction dressed as commerce. 2. European goods entered Africa with European colonists. 3. The Congo River was an obstacle, not a highway. The Oku of the Tio and the Mokonzi of the Bobangi would like a word. Those beer mugs did not end up between the Ruki and Momboyo rivers by accident. They were carried by a network. Kinshasa, the largest French-speaking city on earth. It sits at the exact location of Entamo and Kinshasa, 2 of the 4 permanent markets. Lingala descends directly from the trade language developed by the Bobangi to communicate with trading partners across the Congo-Ubangi axis. The modern DRC produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. This is not a recent failure. It is a 300-year-old design. The Bobangi, who built the most successful commercial network in 18th century Central Africa, could not buy land. Instead of capital accumulation producing capital investment, it produced patron-client networks. The Mokonzi accumulated people rather than property. The Bobangi invented a form of capitalism optimized for a world without land titles. It worked, and then colonial land law arrived and made the whole system illegible. Here is what the mainstream version gives you: a pristine, isolated, pre-commercial rainforest. Here is what the actual history shows: a sophisticated, multi-layered commercial civilization. German beer mugs reached the Momboyo Basin in the 18th century because African commercial networks were sophisticated enough to carry them there. The forest was never empty. The river was never an obstacle. The trade was never invisible. They didn't teach you this. Now you know why it matters. Subscribe if this is the kind of history you want more of.